Welcome, comrades, to this week's Online Communist Forum hosted by Communist Party of Great Britain. This week, we've got a slight change to the normal way in which we have these events. This week, we're going to have Yassamine Mather speak firstly on Iran, which is obviously at the epicenter of world politics at the moment. And she's going to speak for about half an hour, and then we're going to have discussion. And then afterwards, Jack Conrad will come in with a shortened political report. Now, this week, unlike other weeks, we're going to continue live streaming for the discussion. So if you want to bear that in mind, if you don't want to be seen on social media in this discussion, you can just turn off your camera. But otherwise, I think we'll just go ahead and I'll ask Yasmina to please begin her talk. Thanks, Yasmina.
Thanks very much, Anne. I hope I won't repeat much of what I've already written last week because I don't want to bore you with what I've already said. So I'll pick up, if you like, for the latter days of these protests, which is from the 9th of January, the evening of the 8th, the 9th. And obviously, you all know this started with people protesting against the rate of the dollar, the inflation, economic issues, but increasingly became a political protest, as it does always in Iran. And indeed, in any country where there is a dictatorship, the slogans that we've heard became "Death to Dictator," calling for the clerics to leave the country, and that has been the pattern. On January the 8th, the evening of January the 8th, and later on, the Iranian government cut off internet and phone access nationwide. And that drastically changed the outside coverage. Contrary to what the Islamic Republic wanted, I don't think it limited that. It limited it to a certain extent, but it didn't end it. What we have with this blackout that has now been exercised for more than 60 hours, we have in my opinion, an increase in fake news. We already had the fake news. I mentioned it in my article last week, but I think we are now having an increase in that. Why? Two reasons. One is that the people who have access to Musk's Starlink and therefore are both better off, but also inevitably supporters of reactionary alternatives, have dominated the airspace, and Western media is very keen because obviously you can't have protest except unless there is a big figurehead, unless you have a leader, a big figure. So they've all jumped on the bandwagon of what is Mossad's view, which is to promote Reza Pahlavi, but also to a certain extent the view of the State Department, but not exclusively Reza Pahlavi and the British Foreign Office. So we are getting a lot more fake videos. Why I'm saying this is that there is no way of checking what is being shown as people shouting pro-Shah slogans, while in the week up to the 9th, we knew that quite a lot of protests where we heard any pro-Shah slogans were actually Mossad audio added to existing videos. Why do we know it? Because a huge number of protesters who actually hate the Shah, hate the government, but also hate the Shah, took to social media to put the two videos next to each other to tell us that this was false video. This was fake audio added to their protest, during which they were shouting anti-Shah, but also anti-dictatorship, anti-Khamenei slogans. This is the continuation of years of these fake bots. these fake bots, I think there is a good Haaretz article explaining how this has happened. I hope Moshe will explain more about that. But these fake bots have been working for the last 2 or 3 years. They show a very large number of supporters for pro-Pahlavi slogans. And as soon as you write anything against Zionism or against Pahlavi, you're bombarded by slogans, shouting, accusations, and so on. Now we have come to a stage where obviously the protests changed dramatically from what they were in the first 10 days, 8 days, into a much more violent situation. There is accusations from both sides in terms of both the level of violence, but also the number of victims. So here we have the opposition and various human rights groups putting a figure of 100 plus dead. It might be true, we don't know. We also have the Iranian government claiming that these people are setting fire to mosques, so therefore they are enemies of God, not just of the country, and that's punishable by death. This has in itself escalated the government's approach to the demonstration. The reformist president of Iran, Pezeshkian, is telling us that there are infiltrators, Mossad agents who joined the demonstration, set fire to mosques, set fire to Rasht Bazaar, and today he's claiming they actually beheaded people in demonstrations to create terror. The opposition, the protesters, are saying the opposite. They're saying, we hate the mosque because it represents repression. And it's very difficult at this stage, given the blackout, to be precise on to what is being said, who is correct. I have no doubt that the Islamic Republic has used violence against the demonstrators. I don't think anyone who has followed 47 years, more than 4.5 decades of Islamic Republic rule, has any doubt that they are capable of absolute terror against their own population. Having said that, and repeating the fact that the Islamic Republic is paranoid about Mossad agents, CIA agents, in this particular case, they're not exaggerating the existence of Mossad agents, because Mossad clearly claims, in fact, is very proud to say that it has agents in these demonstrations. My guess is that they act as agents provocateurs, but we can't forget the fact that the anger and the ways these protesters are really desperate in continuing under very severe conditions their protest is a sign that the government is incapable of delivering, that after years of promises, the situation is economically very bad for people. Social repression is slightly moderated in terms of women's clothes, but aspects of social repression remain. Political repression is very strong. We know that even if you have a website that publishes left-wing articles, which was tolerated during a certain period by the Islamic Republic, in the last few months, they've arrested people associated with those websites. If you're a worker demanding unpaid wages, you're likely to end up in prison, as many of the Vahed bus company workers have ended up in prison. If you're a woman who continues to fight for women's life freedom, you might be in prison, and so on. The list is very long. So just because the Iranian government is paranoid, just because there are Mossad agents, we should not deny the fact that this anger is real, it has deep roots, And it's the threats of the Islamic Republic in the last 24 hours in terms of what Ghalibaf is saying, if the US attacks, we will be threatened. He threatens all-out war. He's a senior figure in the former Revolutionary Guard, important person. The fact that leaders of the Islamic Republic are now saying, if the US attacks in defense of these protesters, we will bomb various cities and so on, has escalated this beyond what was a protest against the Iranian government. Now, I will come to foreign intervention in a minute. One thing that is very clear is that whatever the Islamic Republic will do at this stage, it is reluctant to use the army, and it is relying on the Revolutionary Guards and Basij. Basij is a kind of Islamic militia. Why wouldn't they use the army? They might later, but at this stage, I think for people like Khamenei, using the army is too close to a repetition of the way the Shah dealt with similar protests in 1979, late 78, early 79. And that is why, both because they don't maybe trust everyone in the army, despite closer connections now with the Revolutionary Guards and so on. But that history, that background will stop them at this stage to use the army. However, if these protests continue, we don't know. And you have to remember that this cycle of violence creates more violence. What we have is a situation where, say 100 people have been killed, say less than 100 people have been killed, there will be ceremonies for these people. I noticed today a child of 3 was killed in Kermanshah. There was a huge demonstration, although the government is claiming it was the protesters who killed this child. But anyway, there was a huge demonstration. There will be the cycle of protests to commemorate the death of these people, and that will culminate. If we look at the history of 1979, it will culminate in bigger and bigger demonstrations. Now, Trump and the United States want regime change in Iran, and there is no doubt about that. And we can see that some of these events could lead to the kind of regime change they want. However, despite threatening to use violence, military force against Iran, so far, Trump hasn't done this. This doesn't mean he won't do it tonight or tomorrow night, but he hasn't done it so far. So what has stopped him so far? One is that I'm sure his advisors will tell him that such an intervention would risk ending the protest, in that an attack on a country inevitably makes people more defending their own country, as it happened in July, in June, in the 12-day war. But there is also Trump's excuses on why he hasn't. So I listened to this interview he gave on Fox News last, I think it's Thursday. And he said, quite a lot of these people who've died, they weren't actually killed by the regimes. That's why, sorry, we can't intervene. They were killed in stampedes. There were large crowds and they were killed. This is exactly the excuse of the Islamic Republic. So he's repeating that because in some ways he knows that I am sure he can defeat Iran's Islamic Republic. I don't see an impossibility to defeating Islamic Republic, but at this stage they're calculating various ways of dealing with what is happening, and what is happening is not bad for them, irrespective of what occurs immediately. And my own question is that my own view is that unless things change dramatically, we might not see a military intervention, not because the US is scared of Iran closing the Hormuz, the Strait of Hormuz, stopping oil flow, or Iran's missile capabilities. As far as I can tell, and this is only from what others have told me, so I might be wrong, but as far as I can tell, the US is pursuing three simultaneous options in terms of replacing the Islamic Republic. And it's calculating its way. I know that Trump is presented as this idiot who jumps and does things, but I think he's actually more calculating when it comes to his plans. So the pro-Shah people are mainly in the western provinces, south and western provinces, and they're clearly, Mossad is active there. Why they've chosen that, I don't know. And it's quite clear that Netanyahu, having met Reza Pahlavi, having had almost 2.5 years of close association between Zionist supporters and pro-Shah supporters, sees this as an opportunity to create a pro-Zionist regime in the Middle East that he can support. But this is not shared. This is not necessarily the only policies that Trump is following. The Trump administration is also in close connections with sections of the Kurdish opposition, and this Kurdish opposition is anti-Pahlavi. They are not royalists. And we saw this while the videos were appearing from Kurdish cities. We could see very strong anti-Pahlavi slogans in those demonstrations. This includes the Kurdish Democratic Party of Iran, which is probably still of some significance, and the faction of the Kumale organization, which is not involved in the royalist camp. They are also, as far as I can tell, and this is slowing down the US policy, in negotiations with elements of the regime, maybe as a repeat of the Venezuela scenario. The problem here is that the demonstrators want Khamenei removed. He's unlikely to leave voluntarily. I don't think he's the kind of person who will leave. But also his immediate security, as far as I can understand, is very difficult to penetrate, maybe impossible. There are figures. I know the Times has mentioned Larijani, the parliamentary speaker, former military officer in the Islamic Revolutionary Guard, who is currently the secretary of the National Security Council, as someone who could be, if you like, the person who will do this smooth transfer of power. It's possible. He has his grievances against, although he's a very loyal servant of the Islamic Republic, he has his grievances against Khamenei. Khamenei stopped him, his candidacy for presidency in more than one occasion. However, I don't see him as someone who will rebel to that extent. My guess is that the collapse within the supporters of the regime will only happen if the protests continue tonight and tomorrow night. Today has been more quiet in Iran. If these protests continue, my guess is that there are those who will work with the Trump administration for a smooth transfer of power because they don't want Reza Pahlavi or because they don't want the country facing a war. But these are all suppositions. We don't know. In terms of the non-Pahlavi opposition, of course, there is all this campaign by the right. And here I see the British Foreign Office is actually more eager for Reza Pahlavi. I don't know if you saw the demonstrations in London, but they actually allowed the demonstrator to go above the balcony of the embassy to remove the flag and put the Pahlavi flag on. Now imagine the kind of support that the British police gives to the Israeli embassy, as many people have rightly pointed out. This is an embassy, you're supposed to be around it. So it's quite clear that there is a lot of sympathy. We have all the Zionist labor ministers expressing what Netanyahu wants them to say, which is support for Pahlavi. BBC is in a awkward position and is now taking, in my opinion, putting out fake videos without warnings that this could be. Because last week, when people were putting the fake video next to the real video, where people were shouting against the Shah, and the video was showing pro-Shah slogans, they were showing it. Today they are not, yesterday they didn't. My guess is that they are under pressure by Foreign Office, but also that the Royalists and Mossad have done a very good publicity. So the Royalists call BBC Ayatollah BBC, right? And this is a bit like the Daily Express saying the BBC is left-wing or pro-woke or whatever. And this, because they are such weak people, they are influenced by this and they actually take on this. I shouldn't say too much. I refused an invitation today to speak at BBC Persian for this meeting, so maybe I should have fought more for that. Then so in terms of bourgeois alternatives, the press and the media are saying, oh, we need figureheads. And we've got two groups of bourgeois liberal oppositions emerging. Inevitably, in times of dispute, people emerge. They're both, neither of which can be supported. They are, one of them is led by the first Nobel Peace Prize winner of Iran, Shirin Ebadi, and ex-royalist, one reactionary pro-Zionist faction of Kurdish group Komele Mohtadi. They are, in my opinion, they have very little chance. Neither of these two groups are making any serious statements against foreign intervention about genocide in Israel. The second group is led by the second winner, Nobel Prize winner, Narges Mohammadi, and more importantly, by the film director Panahi, by a former reformist Tajzadeh. Their initial statement has no mention of opposition to US intervention or genocide. I am informed that they are under a lot of pressure to change that, and they probably will change that given the kind of pressures they're facing. But again, this is a bourgeois alternative. I don't think anyone would have anything to do with it. What about the working class? Well, there are about 6-7 leaflets now out from the workers' organizations. These workers' organizations are very clear. They support the protest. They say, we've been saying this for years now. Our wages are not paid in time. The economic situation is terrible. And when we protest, we are arrested. But we definitely don't want foreign intervention. We are against the Shah. The Shah's regime was as unequal, as corrupt as this one. And this includes the Wahed bus workers, long leaflet. It's on many websites. I think Jacobin will publish it as well. There's Pars oil workers. They were striking for months and no one was reporting it. In different sets of numbers, because the oil industry has been divided into contractors, and so they were different times. You have Haftape sugarcane workers. If you remember, they've been in protest for a very long time. And again, their leaflet is very clear about foreign intervention, against tyranny, but also against the against the Shah. And we also have new formations, the Electricity and Metal Workers Association, the Council for organizing contractual oil workers. Now, this is a problem because unlike 1979, it's very difficult to organize a nationwide oil worker strike. Neoliberal economic policies, the capitalist policies of the Islamic Republic has privatized the oil industry. There are hundreds of contract companies, and some of the people who have the history of the oil workers' strike are clearly trying to organize differently. Who is supporting them? Obviously, their voice is not heard in the British press and media. CNN doesn't cover them. But for example, the demonstrators who defended the protest in Iran in Berlin and Stockholm were very good yesterday at promoting these slogans as opposed to Pahlavi. What what does all that say about the immediate future? Very difficult to say. My guess is that the repression has been so severe in the last 48 hours that it will take a lot of courage to go out tonight. And you're empty-handed, you are facing a very brutal regime. And the calls for military intervention by Trump actually deters people from joining the protests because at the end of the day, they don't want their country destroyed like Libya. I mean, the comparison with Libya, everyone in Iran is now showing photos of what happened in Libya. I don't think it's quite a parallel, but the fact that people are so worried about it is significant. Can the regime solve the economic situation? No. We saw in the middle of these protests Pezeshkian trying to reform the economy. I'm not an expert on economy, but everyone tells me in the middle of an upheaval, trying to improve the economy or change basic things like the rate of exchange, reducing the rate of the dollar between $2 to one to 2 cents between to 1 cent actually counteracted. So because Iran has these two levels of currency, he merged them. The dollar went down in the open market for a few days, and then it rose up. So the oligarch, the people who are controlling the economy, some of whom are private capital and some of whom are state capital, clearly have economic interest, political interest that stops this kind of reform from working. On the other hand, the prices are just impossible to tolerate for ordinary Iranian. Even middle-class Iranians and upper-class Iranians are complaining about inflation. They say you go for a good early in the morning, it's one price. By late afternoon, it's got a different price. Why? Because the rate of the dollar has changed and the import good has changed in value, in price. So I don't think this will be the last set of protests, even if the government with repression can manage to stop these. It can't. What can we do? I would imagine we have to show solidarity with the Iranian people, not the Iranian government. And at this stage, be a voice for the kind of oppositions that the bus workers have presented, the kind of oppositions that the oil workers, informal oil workers are presenting, and raise their voice to reduce this almost monologue about Islamic Republic or the Shah. And finally, I want to say just a couple of words about, I understand that the international left is horrified by the calls of return of the Shah, especially those my age, older, and so on. But at the end of the day, we also must blame the Islamic Republic that such a horrible, terrible slogan is being shouted, even if it's by a few people. Why? Because contrary to what bourgeois analysts tell radio programs and so on, it isn't the case that every revolution ends up like this. No, not every revolution has ended up. As much as I don't approve of Nicaragua or Cuba, that's not, people are not calling back for the return of the old regime. Even at the worst time of USSR, people didn't say, oh, let's bring the Romanovs back. It is the corruption in the Islamic Republic. It is the fact that it has not been able to maintain any of the slogans of 1979's revolution and is now presiding over a corrupt capitalist country where inequality between the rich and the poor has reached unprecedented level that allows the royalist slogans to be raised by anybody. And so at the end of the day, as much as I hate the royalists, I must admit I blame the Islamic Republic for the revival of this reactionary phenomenon. Thank you.
Thank you, Yasmina, for an excellent summary. So interesting. And I will start to ask for contributions. Before I bring other people into the debate, I just want to remind people to raise your hands if you're in the, if you're a participant in the immediate debate, but if you're not, then also let us know in the chat if you want to speak, and then we'll let you in. I do have one indicator already. I wanted two, and I want to give an opportunity to Musha also if you want to add in something at an early stage in the discussion. 2 points I just wanted to make, if you don't mind, is I'm just wondering how much effect it would have if there was some degree of regime change, if it was only from the point of view of decapitation, from the perspective of lifting the sanctions, how much would that give to the working class in Iran, and whether that is one of their slogans at the present time. And the second thing is, do you think that there is a possibility that the theocratic regime itself, like it's always been able to reform itself, it seems, with when threats come along, with somebody who's meant to be a modernist of some kind. But I wonder whether there's anybody, sorry, can you please turn off your mics? Anybody able to do that at this moment. And then just the final thing was that some of the articles that you've been circulating on social media, the various views of bourgeois commentators, really, some of which are quite useful, is this idea that within Iran now that people who are protesting are not so concerned about what's going on in Gaza or in Syria or in other places, that they just simply want to protect themselves, and that they resent the fact that the regime has been, posing as a supporter of those countries, of those victims of Israeli genocide, and has been hypocritical, I suppose. Anyway, so I'll stop. I have three. Ian, and then Jack, and then Musha.
Thanks. I wasn't going to come in, but just that last point was very interesting, actually, about other even failed revolutions. They didn't call for the return of the Tsar when the USSR was collapsing. The right-wing opposition in Nicaragua, at least, calling for the return of the Somozas. And it was making me think about when these actual restorations did happen. And of course, the Stuarts in this country, or the Bourbons in France, are probably the two main examples. And those were pretty unstable thrones where there was quite a turnover within the monarchy here, between monarchies and republics and other forms in France. And so the Shah's son did return. Do you expect that would be an unstable throne, or would it be a complete disaster, establish a tyranny like his father? It's also very interesting what you're saying about the royalist slogans not being as big of a part of this as is reported in the news. But my question would be, why is it pushed so much, even by pretty liberal mainstream bourgeois media, if you will, like Channel 4 News, that this is the biggest and also the most royalist of all the Iranian protest movements. Are they just wrong, but think that, or is there an agenda there? They don't strike me as particularly willing, the royalism. They seem to really be taken aback by it. And of course, the role of Trump calling, saying if you kill people, I'll go in and decapitate the regime. It seems to be pretty egged on by him. And yeah, the decapitation thing, that would be the Venezuela model where Trump claims Maduro's deputy is his puppet, but she still recognizes Maduro. So that could be pretty messy. But maybe in Iran, it could be a bit different because of the different layers of power with the supreme leadership and so on. So yeah, just a few questions about that. How stable or otherwise could it be, whatever happens going forward?
Okay, thank you, Ian. Jack? And then Moshe.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks, Yasmin. Yeah, I mean, I'm just really wanted to comment, and maybe this will elicitate a response from you. I mean, I sort of go along with Ian that I'm very struck in terms of the media that I've been listening to. So I listen to Radio 4 News, and we get a sort of diet of, I mean, I'll quote, "The prince called for protests." Well, you know, I'm not saying it's equivalent that Yassamine Mather called for protests, and therefore, you know, so what they're doing is clearly in our heads, and maybe this is directed, you know, via BBC Persian. I'd be interested to see what you're saying about the difference. I think there might be a difference between BBC Radio 4 and Persian BBC, simply because the Persian audience isn't going to be as naive as perhaps the British audience. But so I'd like you to comment on that. But yeah, I mean, I'm listening and reading in terms of newspapers that the prince called for protests, and therefore we have these record numbers out. I'm personally extremely skeptical here, because I read intelligent commentary. There was an article, I think a good article in the FT on Pahlavi, and basically said, look, I mean, and I agree with that. Look, there's a huge difference between 1979 and 2026. In 1979, there was an alternative government. It was called the clergy. And this guy, I mean, we also get on the BBC this idea that you have to have the leader, all with capitals. And without the leader, you know, things won't happen. So they believe that apartheid was overthrown by Nelson Mandela. You know, he sort of comes out of prison and he says, Lenin overthrows Tsarism. So, you know, there he is, he's in Switzerland, but he overthrew Tsarism. He's an evil guy, but he comes back to Russia. He overthrows the provisional government. And you have to have a Lenin or a Khomeini or a Nelson Mandela. You know, it's that sort of image. And that's why I don't know whether they believe it, but, you know, that's why, in my opinion, at least, you've got this narrative. They sort of want to believe it, and maybe they do believe it. But it just strikes me that, you know, the prince doesn't lead the opposition to the extent it exists. You've already described the Kurds. Well, they're against him. I mean, are there masses of people on the street? I mean, what sort of organization has he got? Either abroad, other than the CIA and Mossad, and you even said with the CIA and the Americans, they're not quite, I mean, they're not quite all on board. So I'm just extremely skeptical. I'm extremely skeptical of the sort of, how should I put it, the great man of history model, first of all. And, you know, and I'm extremely skeptical that, you know, the Shah, not the Shah, the prince is at the head of some sort of serious network, serious organization. And in 1979, not only did we have the mosques, which were organized in every town, every city, every village, we also had a left that could go, you know, from small, but it had support, and it could grow extraordinarily rapidly, and it had that history, you know, going back to the 40s, to the 20s. You know, there was a strong historic left. So I'm just really, I know you don't know, but I'm wanting to draw out of you more. Look, should we take the Shah seriously? I can't myself take him seriously. So the Israelis are backing the Shah. To me, that would be a good reason why an awful lot of people in Iran, and I know that there will be a pro-Israeli sentiment somewhere in Iran, but are the masses going to go, yeah, because Israel's plotting with this guy and the CIA, yeah, let's have him back. I really don't, I just don't buy it. History with Mossadegh and, you know, American interference and all the rest of it. So that's just my skepticism there. And just finally, I mean, we were talking last night, myself and Yasmin, on email, and she was saying to me, and, you know, I think this says something. Look, I meant to go in tomorrow to the BBC Persian because they think that there's going to be an American attack. You know, all I would say is I would expect an American attack, but I would expect precisely, I mean, I don't know, that they must calculate it, that would it have the opposite effect? Because it all depends on how you do it. But again, I'm just expressing my lack of knowledge, but the very fact that the BBC were expecting it says something. Yeah, and the only other thing I was going to say on that score is that my expectation is we should expect the unexpected. I don't think that we're just going to get another version of Caracas. I think we should expect something that when it happens, we go, bloody hell. And then I can tell you, well, I expected it, but I didn't expect it in that form. I mean, I just don't know. But I don't think it's just going to be a kidnapping. That's my I could switch on the news now, and there you are. The 86-year-old Ayatollah is on an American helicopter being flown to some bloody torture base. I don't know.
Okay, thanks. Moshe?
Thank you. Just a few, maybe 3 or 4 brief remarks. First of all, this Pahlavi is not just Netanyahu's candidate. The connection, the support of Israel for the Shah goes back a very long way to before 1979. Israel was deeply involved in the Shah regime and trying to shore up to prevent his downfall to the last moment. There's plenty of documentation regarding this. So he's not Netanyahu's candidate. He's the candidate of the Israeli political establishment and the Mossad. So as opposed to other issues on which the Israeli political establishment is split, or the political elite is split, or the present government is pursuing a line different from those of previous governments. In this is a constant. So for support for the Shah, read Israel and the Mossad, not necessarily the United States. There is no convincing indication that the Shah is the candidate of Trump. I'll return to this a bit later. The penetration of the Mossad in Iran is well evidenced and well documented. It is clear that there is a very heavy, very heavy personal infiltration, as well as infiltration by electronic means. But let me just note that to some extent it works both ways. There is also quite a noticeable infiltration of Iranian digital infiltration of Iranian agents in the Israeli cyber sphere. Iranian intelligence has been able to penetrate to the phones of senior Israeli leaders, including some ministers. There is a constant report in the Israeli press by the Haaretz expert, for example, Ben Yaakov, who writes regularly on these issues. He reports about infiltration of Iranian intelligence into Israel. And that includes the unmasking of, repeatedly, you read about the unmasking of Israeli Jews who have been actually acting as agents for the Iranian intelligence. This is reported. This is almost a regular. I mean, it's not reported in a way that is meant to create hysteria. It's not reported in a hysterical way. It is reported in a matter-of-fact way. Two more people have been discovered as working for Iranian intelligence, this kind of thing. And finally, I think that Trump is calculating his steps very carefully. I would hesitate to ascribe to him the intention of regime change. I think the experience of Venezuela has shown that he's more interested in regime capture than in regime change. What he has done in Venezuela, contrary to what a lot of people have been predicting, and I'm sure we'll return to discuss Venezuela later on in this session, but briefly, he has avoided the dangerous, as he recognized it, the dangerous path of getting bogged down in regime change. He doesn't want to regime change. He doesn't want to take responsibility for running Venezuela. He wants the oil, but he wants to get the oil by using the existing regime of Venezuela in a way that will be convenient for his interests. I think he may be looking for a similar or analogous path in Iran. Of course, the situation is very different, and it's not clear that he can actually get this result, but who knows? And I join Jack's note of expect the unexpected. I think in such a situation, any definite prediction is perilous to make. I wouldn't venture it. Thank you.
Thank you, Moshe. So I have 3 remaining speakers, and then I'm going to bring Yasmina in to respond and move on to the second part. Mike, and then Ant and Sachin.
Okay, this is a dead short point in relation to Ian's point. I don't think that this is analogous to the English or French, the English Restoration of 1660, that putting
Thanks, Mike. Actually, Yasmina has asked if she can come in at this point because there's been so many issues raised. She needs an opportunity. So, with the permission of those waiting to speak, obviously we can carry on. There's no, if the discussion is going to carry on, we will let it do so because it's so important. So, Yasmina, if you want to come back, and then I'll take Ant and Sachin after that.
Thanks very much. Sorry, I'm just losing track, otherwise I wouldn't have interfered. So your own questions were very good. It depends what kind of decapitation we have. If we have army generals put in power with a section of secular, a broader kind of section of Iranian bourgeoisie, then the US might, and not immediately, but might in the long term reduce the sanctions. However, most people don't seem to have a slogan about, okay, let's have regime change so the sanctions go away. I know that might be something they feel, and people are fed up of sanctions, but people are also aware that sanctions couldn't have made them so poor had it not been for corruption and for general, capitalist mismanagement, but also rentier economies, that kind of thing. So we don't see it as that, but obviously behind all this, people are aware that sanctions is making the situation worse. The Islamic Republic is great at reinventing itself, and it has done so before. So we can't expect it not to reinvent itself. And in the first week of these protests, even the supreme leader was saying, oh, some people, these demands are fair. Well, you've been in power for 4 decades. People are getting poorer and poorer. And now suddenly you've realized this is a fair comment. It's just unbelievable. So I don't think they can just, if you like, reproduce Khatami, which was the first reformist president, raise Pezeshkian in a strong position. They've put him in a very difficult situation because of the ways they've violently attacked the protests. So he's lost if you like, I'm a middleman, I'm with some of the protesters' position. So it'd be very difficult to do that. And that is why the rebellion from within is a possibility. It's not necessarily something we expect or definitely someone we know, because obviously if the Times is putting the name of Larijani out there, he's not going to be the candidate. There's going to be surprise candidates for this. But it is possible that there will be what Moshe rightly described, not regime change, but what one of the papers today was talking, a smooth transfer of power. So that's horrible, but that's a possibility. It won't be smooth because so many people have died now. So yeah. In terms of Gaza, Syria, Lebanon, yes, we hear quite a few people shouting the slogan, never mind Gaza, never mind Syria, never mind Lebanon, we want Iran. And nationalist slogans are actually quite strong, more than Pahlavi slogans, Iran, Iran, Iran. Which might be heard in Washington and therefore might have deterred the military action. The problem is twofold. On the one hand, let's not talk about Gaza first. Syria and Lebanon were Iran's insurance policies, right? But the ordinary people have heard this bombardment of propaganda from Mossad, from British press, from British media, from US media, from French and German media. They all have their TV radio stations in Persian who have told them it's only Iran who pays money to Hezbollah. All of Iran's money, they've stolen from you, they've given it to Hezbollah. Now, the sophistication of this changes depending on which radio station you're listening. Radio Free Europe, which is US paid State Department, clearly says all your money is gone to Gaza and Lebanon and Syria. But then the French one might show it a bit, say it more subtly. And then we have, during the last 2.5 years, during the Gaza genocide, we have Mossad and all these other outlets saying Iran is spending all this money on Hamas, or Iran spent all this money on Hamas, and look, they're getting defeated. Well, but Iran didn't pay for Hamas. It was Qatar via Israel that was paying for Hamas. So fact number one, this is wrong. But also, Iran doesn't deny this because it wants its cake and eat it. So on Arab media, it says, oh, we are spending so much for Palestine. We are doing so much for Lebanon. All of it, in my opinion, more hot air than real. I'm not saying they didn't spend any money outside Iran. They obviously have military quarters outside Iran. But some of it was insurance policy, and they've lost them. So they've lost Syria, they've lost Lebanon. So we can say they are much weaker than they were before. But did they spend a lot on Palestine? I really don't think so. Palestinians question this claim. But for Iran, on the one hand, its opponents say it's done this, and also the country claims we are doing this, right? So there is that problem. Now, of course, I think you underestimate this bombardment of publicity by foreign press and Mossad in terms of, the way Iran is involved in all of these. As a result, people who are impoverished, people who are hungry say, well, why are you spending your money outside our country? Well, the reality is, no, I would say with almost reasonable confidence that the money is not spent in Gaza. It wasn't spent in Lebanon in the latter years. In the early years, yes, but in the latter years, Hezbollah gained capitalist support from Lebanese rich Christians, rich Shia people. It didn't need Iran's Islamic Republic's money. Most of the money is within the corrupt oligarchs within the borders of Iran. The money they have sent it abroad, but they've sent it to personal accounts in islands that are tax-free. They've sent it to Canada. They've sent it to US. But the money is within the is distributed there. It hasn't gone to Gaza. So that's another false claim, in my opinion. You are right that it's not just the sections of the liberal press, Channel 4 is saying that. But I think it's very difficult. Before the blackout, we could show the videos where people were shouting no to Shah. Now we can't. So these people are getting fed what I would assume very clear agenda is putting forward. Look at what was put out about Ukraine. Look at what was put out about Gaza. I mean, okay, 100 people might have been killed. What did the British Zionist government, Labour government do about tens of thousands of Palestinians being killed? Nothing. And yet the last 2 days we hear British ministers saying, if the US intervenes, we will help them to save Iranians. This is just propaganda. It's just lies. Having said that, I think we have to follow some bourgeois press is better. I think Financial Times, from what I read, is more accurate than the Times or BBC or these channels. I think some of the Haaretz is actually quite good in Israel. Jerusalem Post has put an article against Pahlavi. Time magazine has exposed Pahlavi very well in a longish article. So it's not people aren't buying it. Not everyone is buying this rubbish, but some people have an agenda. Some people have been bought. Some people are just stupid. You have all the categories. Difference, I think there is a difference between the Persian, BBC Persian and Radio 4 and Radio 5 for that matter. To my surprise, actually, Sky TV has come out better. I mean, quite a few of the people they've interviewed, including me briefly, but quite a few of the people they have interviewed have been very clear that the Reza Pahlavi slogans are made up. One academic in US they interviewed called it the echo chamber of the media. And I think that's true. Media is in that echo chamber. Someone says it, the other one quotes it, and it becomes a snowball effect. It becomes a huge pretense that that is the case. The problem with Reza Pahlavi is that he's quite incapable of uniting even the people who were with him. So in the last few weeks, we've had a lot of people talking against him who were his closest allies, his advisors. It's a bit like, the royals have these people who are very close to them, and then when they fall out, they go and say all sorts of things. And we've had this time and again. Let me give you one example of how things work. So BBC Persian actually had yesterday morning a picture of one guy, one person, with a picture of Reza Pahlavi, okay? And they've made this headline news. It's front news, it's headline news. At the same time, I was receiving video reels of a young woman without a headscarf setting fire to first the picture of Reza Pahlavi and then setting fire to the picture of Khamenei. So clearly she was not impressed with either of them. Now, I could put that if I was an editor of a big channel and say, this is news, right? I also received from another person a picture from a Tehran Pars demo. Tehran Pars is a suburb, working class suburb of East Tehran. Someone sent me a picture, and other lefties got the same picture. It's not personal to me. It showed the slogan very clear: no to dictatorship, no to Pahlavi. The slogans that the left had in 1979, bread, freedom, labor, work, bread, work, freedom, right? It was one of the common lefty slogans, barabari non azadi, right? So I could have, if I had a channel in my possession, I could put that and say, look, everyone in Iran is supporting the old lefty slogan of 1979. It's not true. There are different groups with very different options, and this is not, this is irresponsible, in my opinion, irresponsible editorial policy, or echo chamber, or foreign office intervention. Whichever it is, it's not very good. Someone in text had written, isn't Khamenei 86 and in poor health? He's 86. He doesn't seem in that bad a health. I don't think the idea that he will die is necessary. He seems to have very good medical support. He has a cancer, but my understanding is that he will die with that cancer as opposed to die from that cancer. The other ones that I wanted to talk about is Azerbaijan. Now, the two Turkish provinces, Azerbaijan, East and West, have become extremely anti-Shah. I don't know what it is. It could be that there is Turkish government influence there, but everyone is surprised that the two provinces where we haven't seen royalist slogans are definitely in Azerbaijan. There was a reference to 1979 by Jack, and I think that's important. So yes, the clergy had the mosque, and that was an organizing place. These people don't have that. But also, let us not forget that for all the mistakes the Iranian left made after February 1979, the crucial 2 days that Khomeini didn't want, because he didn't want a revolution. He wanted a smooth transfer of power from one capitalist regime to a clerical Bazari capitalist regime. The left attacked two garrisons in Tehran, took the arms from the soldiers and distributed them in the street. And these were crucial in changing the balance of forces in 11, 12 February. I don't want to say that was the only factor, but it did change the scenario from what was supposed to be Bakhtiar or the US or whoever giving a smooth transfer of power to the clerics, to a revolutionary situation, which forced them then to start immediately after the revolution to start attacking anyone on the left. I think I've said enough. Thanks, Anne.
Thank you so much, Yasmina. Ant, do you want to come in, make your points?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. Thanks for the speak. I thought we were going to be talking about Trump in America, but
you're actually very muffled. Is there something wrong with your microphone, Ant? You're very muffled.
Very muffled?
Yeah.
No, okay, I don't know. Any better? Are we improving? I can shout up.
Not really. Is it
okay?
The headphone, maybe?
No,
could you speak without the headphone?
No, no, I don't think so. Can't hear me?
It is muffled. I can hear you sometimes, but not very clearly. Okay, he's gone. Okay. Or I don't know what's happened there, but I'm going to bring in Sachin, and if Ant comes back in, I'll take him then.
Yeah, it was quite muffled. It would be like if you were to talk.
Yeah, don't worry about that. Yeah.
Mask. Okay. Okay. Just a small one. I'll call it suffocation. I know lots of things have been talked today about internal affairs. So I just want to think about external affairs as well. Like we also think, you know, like say socialism in one country not possible, blah blah blah. You know, like just the normal sort of thing. In regard to Iran, and this is not just for Yassamine, this is for anybody else that comes in as well. I want them to also think, well, all right, what's now the level of isolation? Whether it's, say, cultural, economic, or political, and you know, the tale of a camel and its back breaking really, really easily, you know, like what would then just be in immediate affairs a prospect of general collapse, but then it's not just everything going on externally right now. So from in there, like, you know, what their relations within, you know, other localities. I think Yasmin mentioned something locally there with Azerbaijan. There's general sanctions. How you know, like, and I only mentioned socialism within one country there because you can't provide everything yourself, and so then there'll be a reaction to other things, whether it's internally or externally, whether it's just getting bread or whatever. Yep. So just wanted to throw some ideas there of it's not quite an extension of what's going on, but it's a slight tangent. But yeah, so just suffocation. What's then the extent then of Iran's general isolation that will lead to general suffocation, and then how easily will Iran just fold anyway, just because there's an extra thing. Sorry, thank you.
Thank you, Sachin. Ant, do you want to unmute and?
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Oh, I don't know what happened. Sorry about that. Many apologies. Obviously not intentional. Okay, I missed quite a bit what the last speaker said. It sounded very interesting, though. Possibly he was saying what I'm going to say. But okay, I'm thinking. You know what Yasmin gave us and what some other speakers gave us was very detailed, almost looking at a situation through a microscope, and I can't do that. And as I said, I was not geared up towards a meeting on Iran, but I just want to say a few things, if you don't mind. None of this is taking place in isolation or a vacuum. So whatever the specific details, there are themes, there are general themes and lessons. And personally, I don't think there's any future in an Arab revolution or even a European revolution. I believe that the stakes today are thoroughly global. Okay. When Jack was speaking, he talked about the left. You know, this is sort of like generic left. But I'm going to agree with my friend in the chat, Frank. And I can't quote him exactly, but I think he will agree that the gist of what he was saying is that, you know, without a communist party, without a genuine, well-rooted, well-established internationalist party, then we are not really going to go anywhere. And I think that's true in this current episode, and it will be true in the future. In the absence of a clear understanding that there is no value in a simple leftist, anti-USA perspective, let's say, we can't advance. If we are promoting some sort of anti-imperialism or support for progressive regimes that is divorced from proletarian revolution, well, equally we can't advance. I think we've got to recognise that the main enemy is always at home, our own bourgeoisie, and that's universally the case. There are no exceptions to that. There's no progressive nationalism today, none at all. There is no path involving national sovereignty or self-determination of peoples, which always ignores the existence of social classes and the fact that the working class does no self-determining. Equally, you can talk, the defense of democracy, which is always bourgeois democracy, simply reinforces the ideology of the dominant class. So trying to sort of like get a little bit more to the point. Today, the program of the Revolutionary Party is a dictatorship of the proletariat. There are no stages to complete. There are no advances outside of this. So the world over, and Iran is only one more episode. The absence, the void, the absence of a revolutionary party of weight and significance, which is well rooted, well before any boiling of the class struggle. Well, that absence means that any uprising, any turmoil, no matter how severe, and this Iranian episode seems to be quite severe as far as I can understand it, yes? No episode, no matter how severe, uprising, turmoil, whatever, it doesn't matter what organizations, the working class can quickly construct or throw up. The political vacuum will be filled, and it will always be filled to the benefit of the ruling class. Okay, so this is not to say that the Revolutionary Party alone is sufficient. The Revolutionary Party is not a magic wand. It does not solve all things. The solution is not simply build a party, a construction which is always retarded by any orientation towards nationalism and as being some sort of as being progressive in any way. No, not at all. The class itself makes the revolution, and it does not hand the reins. It does not hand over the reins to any minority, be that a party, mass or otherwise. The class must create its own organs of power. Historically, the workers' councils, but these are simply an organizational form. The content can only be revolutionary. So the content of these organizational forms can only be revolutionary given the presence of a well-rooted revolutionary party, which does not simply step in as a new ruling class, claiming to be a mass party, therefore we rule. So it does not step in as a new ruling class exercising the proletarian dictatorship by proxy.
Can you?
I thought so. I expected you to say that. The dictatorship of the proletariat is the rule of the workers' own organizations. But these must take on revolutionary perspectives, which simply do not spring up overnight in a spontaneous fashion, but must be actively fought for by revolutionaries, communist revolutionaries within the proletarian organs, the councils. Therefore, both are required, the councils and the party. And if you absent one, there will be no positive result. Maybe a lateral move at best, but I fear that in the situation in which we are living today, a worsening of the situation.
Thank you. Jack, you've got your hand up?
Yeah, I missed. Ant, you sort of you're not muted now, but you just muted yourself. I wonder if you could mute yourself or whatever. But your last remarks were cut off, so I have to apologise. But you're saying, I mean, as a general slogan, I love the slogan, "The main enemy is at home." I think, but that also indicates that we're not just dealing with the world revolution as an abstraction. Clearly, what we're dealing with is a world revolution that has a national aspect. So the main enemy in Britain is the British ruling class. I readily accept that. But I'd ask the question, I don't really want to go there, but if we look at Gaza today, Gaza's been mentioned many times. Anyone who told me that the main enemy in Gaza is at home, i.e. in Gaza, I just don't think is living on planet Earth. So I do think that we need to be concrete here. So I love the slogan. I think as a slogan, it's generally correct, but precisely what we need, and that's why we've put forward the perspective of Europe. We need a strategy, and we need to deal with world revolution, not just as a slogan that sort of solves the problem by saying, well, you can't do anything in Gaza, you can't do anything in Iran, you can't do anything in Europe. We actually need a concrete application of how the working class can go forward, for example, in a world dominated by the US hegemon. The class struggle is not going to proceed, in exact evenness in every country. It's almost certain to be uneven. And that's why you need a strategy. That's why, in our view, you need a strategy that says Europe, not because that can, produce communism, but it can produce precisely an advance towards communism. That was my response to Anne. So a useful contribution, so worthwhile talking about. And if I do get the chance, Anne, I don't know whether other comrades want to come in. I will be, as Moshe, not surprised, just mentioning at least Venezuela and, the wider question. But yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. It really now just depends on Yasmina, if you want to take some time to respond or whether you want to move on.
Very, very short, very few comments. I don't have much to say. First, on a question in text, Iran's Gorbachev. I suppose Pezeshkian is Iran's Gorbachev, so is Zarif. He's even more of a Gorbachev. He's the former foreign minister, the man who negotiated the nuclear deal when Obama was in power. Zarif had a deputy who is the current foreign minister, Arakchi. He's another Gorbachev figure. Now, all of these people don't really have solutions, but neither did Gorbachev. So their idea is if we, and sections of the left support that idea, we should accept that US is the hegemon power. We should turn down our slogans. We should not be so concerned about Israel and Gaza. On Israel, we can have some kind of, Saudi or Qatar style slogans every now and then, motions in UN, but we don't want to upset Israel. And then the US will be our friend, sanctions will be removed, the economy will flourish. That's the scenario of, if you like, the reformist and the left that supports reformists. So that's one scenario. In terms of what Sachin was saying, I don't think people feel suffocated, but they feel suffocated by the regime itself. They don't feel suffocated because of cultural isolation. And that is the difference that the internet has produced. So when you have, the young generation in Iran has grown up with TikTok, Instagram, Twitter. They're all very active in it. They don't feel that they're, if you like, isolated because they can contribute and be part of discussions globally. They follow trends, they follow music, they follow everything internationally. The suffocation comes from the conservative elements of their social area, but also the mosque and the clergy, telling them the kind of behaviors that is acceptable and the kind of behaviors that isn't acceptable. Now, this generation, especially Gen Z, like in Europe, is very, wants to enjoy themselves. They want to listen to music. They want to mix in non-segregated, sexually segregated areas. And in terms of women, it's not just the headscarves. They want to wear everything they want. And that is the suffocation. The suffocation is the conflict between conservative Shia Islam, which still is the dominant ideology of the government, and what this young generation sees as freedom. Now, if you tell them that really this isn't necessarily freedom, that market is buying you in following these fashions and so on, it's very difficult to convince them, because they see what the young generation in the West has as freedom. But that's a very difficult cultural work that people have to do. And I'm not saying everyone is like that. I think university students in Iran are much more conscious of class divisions in other countries. They're far more conscious of, for example, Gaza, Israel situation. But your younger average Iranian does have such illusions. So I'll finish here. Thanks very much, Anne, and leave Jack.
Thank you so much, Yasmine. So Jack, do you want to do your report? It's coming up to 6:30. I don't know whether we want to agree to go to 7:30. So you have the report and some discussion, or comrades want to finish at the normal time?
I think we should try to finish at the normal
Okay.
time, two hours. And some of us at least have been in meetings, I think, since 10:30. So
oh yeah, we've all had meetings.
Quite a long day for some of us.
We all have meetings.
Some of us older folks.
Okay. Oh, well, I won't count myself in as one of those, yes. Go on.
So this is a sort of truncated political report. So we began our second meeting, which was the PCC. Today, earlier in the morning, we were meeting comrades from the Communist Platform in the Netherlands. But the political discussion that we had began, of course, with Iran, and we've not closed that in terms of this particular section, but I'm here to talk about what came after. And I'll begin just with a little fact-let. If you look at The Economist, it's commissioned a pretty comprehensive opinion poll in the United States about Donald Trump. And wow, he is apparently the most unpopular or second most unpopular president in polling history. And so what we have is a minus 17% polling rate. That means that 39%, only 39% of those who replied approve of him. I think there was something like a 4%, I don't know. The other lot don't approve of him. So he is the most unpopular president since the 45th president. This is the funny thing, because the 45th president, if I'm right, was someone called Donald J. Trump. And so the reason I bring this up really is to just, warn comrades on the left who look at opinion polls and simply say it's a done deal. If we look at Donald Trump first presidency, he became extremely unpopular. I think, by the way, of course, he lost the subsequent presidential election, but he went on to win in a decisive way, at least in American terms, the last presidential election. Now, we don't know whether there's going to be a third term. Is he going to stay fit enough anyway to do it? Nonetheless, the point I'm really making here is we need to understand things that, you know, that have a dynamic. It's not a done deal. Now, why is he unpopular? Overwhelmingly, what The Economist reports, it's the economy stupid. You remember the slogan that came out of the mouth of Bill Clinton? That is most certainly the case today. On the other hand, it's also worthwhile just thinking about this question, thinking about our own country. I can remember it. I suspect quite a few other comrades here can actually remember it. And what I'm thinking of is Margaret Thatcher after you know, her election triumph, went on, not least because of the economy and you know, the abandonment of the social democratic settlement, or shall I say rolling back of the social democratic settlement, went on to be extremely unpopular. And the figures I just looked up last night was that her polling approval rate, and I'm not saying we live in a presidential system, so it's different, but nonetheless, her approval rate was 20 to 25%. So that compares with Trump at 39% today. And the reason, of course, I'm quoting Margaret Thatcher is because of the foreign adventure in the Falklands, the successful foreign adventure in the Falklands. She went on to win a triumphant 1983 landslide, and she had approval ratings after the Falklands War of 59%. And that doesn't mean, of course, that 59% of the population or the adult population voted Tory, but it shows you the extent of a foreign adventure, a successful foreign adventure can have, in spite of it's the economy stupid. So I'm not saying for a second that because of that, that means that Trump is finished. We don't know about the midterms. Chances are the Republicans will do badly, but it ain't necessarily so. And I'd also say the same thing, just as an aside, about looking at the Labour Party today and Keir Starmer. He's deeply unpopular. The Labour Party is deeply unpopular. But foreign adventures can change things. Now, I'm not thinking about Britain in terms of its foreign adventure. I don't think that there's going to be another Falklands, but precisely if we look at what's just happened in Venezuela, if we look at what might happen, it's a big might, it's a big if here. It could be another success for Trump. And what we can observe in terms of his polling ratings is a minor uptick in terms of the success. Now, that could all go wrong. It could all prove to be a chimera. Venezuela, the Venezuelan new president isn't going to play ball. Trump doesn't get his way, and maybe they are forced into more severe measures. We simply don't know. And so what I'm stressing is that things are open-ended, and we should view things very much as open-ended. And that's leaving aside the working class as an actor. But I'd simply note that in Venezuela, as far as we know, and that seems to be the case, no American servicemen died. No, not one. A helicopter was hit, kept flying. Something like 30 Cuban soldiers or servicemen, secret guards, or whatever the particular thing died. We do have clearly negotiations going on. There are negotiations with the Rodriguez presidency about reopening the US embassy. So there seems to be something going on that side. On the other side, and again, I'm simply confessing my ignorance here, we also have these colectivos or colectivaros, I don't know how you pronounce it in Spanish, but the Bolivarian militia patrolling the streets, searching, this is what we're told, for Americans. Now, maybe they're searching for Americans, maybe they're on the streets for different reasons. I don't know. And I'm, as I was last week, I'm very reluctant to start talking about, I know that a deal was done, in terms of the regime of Maduro, that there were traitors. I'm sure there were traitors, but is it as straightforward as that? I simply don't know. What I would say is, just like with Iran, the Rodriguez presidency really is between a rock and a hard place. They've got extraordinarily limited room for maneuver. Their ability to call upon international solidarity in any meaningful sense is extraordinarily limited, if not non-existent. It was no surprise to me that when we had the 12-day war with Israel and then with the United States joining in against Iran, Russia, China, the BRICS or whatever, no one came to the rescue of Iran. There were those that thought that they would. I think that's delusional. And I think the same is true with Venezuela, that Russia isn't going to come to the rescue of Venezuela. China isn't going to come to the rescue of Venezuela. And that shows you, I think, or illustrates an important lesson when it comes to global politics. And therefore, I just wanted to raise a couple of examples. Done it before. Greenland, liberal opinion recoils in horror at the idea of American troops leaving their bases, marching in to the capital of Greenland and taking over and announcing the annexation or liberation or whatever phrase they will use, turning Greenland into the equivalent of Puerto Rico or somewhere like that. Why can't it happen? Trump's also talked about offering each Greenlander $100,000 in order to bribe them into voting for unity. We don't know, but I think there are all of those sort of possibilities. And it reminds me, and I know it's very different history, and I'm not trying to draw a direct parallel, but I am saying that the United States its whole history has been one of expansionism. But what I'm reminded of in that particular respect is the union between the English, not crowns, but parliaments, the incorporation of Scotland into what became Great Britain. And that was done through bribery, not from ordinary people being given bribes, but the elite being bribed. They were bullied, yes, but they were also bribed. And money was passed over, and money was paid to those that had invested into the Darien colonial experiment that the British deliberately sabotaged. So bribery is nothing new, and Trump can use that, or he can just use brute force. If it isn't Trump, it will be J.D. Vance, it will be Rubio, who knows next time round, or it could be Trump 3. We just don't know, or it could be a Democrat. And I'm just skeptical of the idea that once, the genie, the illusion of this rules-based world of international law, once it's been shattered, I think it will be very hard to, how should I put it, rehabilitate that lie. It was a lie. Trump has shown it to be a lie. The idea of a Democrat president reviving it, it's not impossible, but I just think it will be extremely hard. Okay, our position would be, if we were in a position to influence the 60,000 strong Greenland population. You ought to have self-determination. Now, what I would emphasize is precisely that's a political slogan, and that's very much something that you not only raise in Greenland, which is being raised in Greenland. The crucial question there is the US proletariat and the world proletariat, but the US proletariat ought to stand by the right of the Greenland population to self-determination. And my point would be that if, for example, which is not impossible, you had a situation of where Denmark said, okay, you be independent, what would happen? It would either be dominated by the United States or it would be dominated by China. I'm not really counting in Russia here, but the idea of independence in a genuine sense, I think is delusional. Here we are living in Britain, at least I am, and you're in Ireland. I think Ireland's independence, it's real, but it's not real. It's dependent on Europe. Before that, it was dependent on Britain. And today, the United Kingdom is thoroughly dependent on the United States. All we need to do is look at the reaction of David Lammy when he was Foreign Secretary to the genocide in Gaza was, I need to consult with lawyers. He is a lawyer. He should know whether there's a genocide. There's Keir Starmer, a human rights lawyer, who has to think about whether Trump and the US administration broke international law when they kidnapped the president of Venezuela. Of course, it's against international law. But what Trump is doing is exposing the reality of international law. But the very fact that he pretends he has to think about it, I think, is an illustration of Britain's radical subordination to the United States, which is admitted pretty widely now, you know, in the mainstream press, The Guardian, Telegraph. You know, what do you expect a British government to do? And to finish on that particular point, just wanted to draw comrades' attention to Cuba. I'm not saying it's 100% accurate, but it chimes truthfully to me. There's a report in The Guardian, I think on Saturday, of the appalling situation in Cuba. What's happened in Cuba, and I include, of course, you have to, US sanctions, as you would in terms of the appalling situation in Iran, the appalling situation in Venezuela. Sanctions are a form of warfare. They're slow, but they have the same effect at the end of the day as war. And what we've seen over the last 4 years in Cuba is the loss of 25% of its population. 25% of its population has got itself abroad. Now, it's not a situation where you can just say, oh, I'm just leaving. You've got to find somewhere that's going to give you a visa. So Cubans are turning up in Russia. Cubans are turning up in Spain, but they are trying to get out. There are loads of Cubans, for example, in Mexico. This is legal migration. The government is basically saying, we'd rather have you out than protesting within. And so what's happening in Cuba is that the population's getting older and older. It's young people that are leaving. Majority of them are women who are leaving. The population isn't being reproduced. And therefore you have a decline of population. And the only one that's more severe is actually Ukraine. And that's why I'm drawing the parallel between sanctions warfare and war warfare. The population of Ukraine's been reduced because women, children, people who want to avoid the draft have gone abroad. And so the only other country that's seen such a severe drop in population has been Ukraine. And yet, and this is my sort of point to finish on this particular section, my point is there are still those on the left that put forward the idea of a British road to socialism, that you can declare the working class in Britain and it will transition to communism. And even more absurdly, the left, in terms of the left's common sense, comrades still put forward the idea of Scottish independence. And the SWP, it's true, puts forward that on the basis that anything that damages Britain is good for the working class. I just cannot buy that. Anyone who tells me that because, you know, Venezuela is a capitalist country, that US sanctions are good because it harms the bourgeoisie in Venezuela is an idiot. I'm sorry, but just an idiot. Anyone who tells me that American and global sanctions, but crucially American sanctions, strengthen the working class in Iran because it weakens the Ayatollahs, it's not true. It actually strengthens them in some respect, but it cripples the working class. Now you can draw up any scenario you want when it comes to Scottish independence, for example. I'm using the word, by the way, in heavy inverted commas. Formal independence, political, independence, the Scottish Parliament and all the rest of it. We can draw up all sorts of scenarios here, but the idea that this would strengthen the working class, I think, is delusional. So yes, I am arguing that what we are seeing illustrated shows you the illusion of socialism in one country. Now, I'm going to finish on this particular section by saying, of course, you had socialism. I'd call it bureaucratic socialism, but call it whatever you will. I would argue you didn't see capitalism. You didn't see the rule of the working class in the former Soviet Union. You had some sort of bureaucratic rule, not over one country, but over an empire. And you might want to include Eastern Europe as part of that. That couldn't survive. That went down. That imploded. So the idea that the left should advocate a British road, a French road, a Scottish road, and as Ant has already said, even a European road or a North American road. No, there can be no national roads or no regional roads to socialism. It has to be conquering the commanding heights of the global economy. We live in a global economy, and capitalism has to be conquered at that level. So the fact that we still get, comrades reporting to us in your party that the common sense in Scotland is to go for independence, both in terms of your party, Scotland, but also to trail behind the SNP, I just think illustrates the bankruptcy of most of the left as is presently constituted. Okay, now I'm just going to say one more thing, and I'm not going to deal with your party. We'll have to wait for Carla Roberts's next article and other articles that are promised in the Weekly Worker this week. I was just going to quote one Alex Kalinikos, who still has a column in Socialist Worker. It's worthwhile reading. Why they've got rid of Alex from the Central Committee, and I presume that they have. I think the SWP conference is still maybe going on as I speak. I'm not quite sure. But we presume that he and 3 others have been given the sack. This is at the beginning of the pre-conference period. He was on the list for the Central Committee. Then he was taken off, and he was taken off not because we're having a generational replacement, but because of his association with the Delta crisis of 2013, from my memory. How you can say that we've removed him from the Central Committee because of his association with Martin Smith and the rape crisis, or the allegation of rape in the SWP, and still have him writing is a bit of a mystery to me. But the fact of the matter is, what we've got in the SWP is not a split, it's an attempt at news management. And what we're talking about, I'm guessing, is the forthcoming book this year. I'm not doing a pre-puff, but Dave Renton's book, which is called, as at least a working title in my understanding, is Comrade Delta. And they've sent lawyers' notes to these 4 saying, will you contest it in court? That's why I don't know the ins and outs of what publishes it. Anyway, I wanted to finish my political report with a quote from Alex Kalinikos, and he's talking about Venezuela. And this is his conclusion in this week's Socialist Worker. The only answer can come from below. Okay. From the further development of the anti-war movements, like the huge movement for Palestine. And my answer to this is no. It's not the only answer. It might be part of the answer. That is certainly true. Parties don't come out of thin air. They don't come out of a vacuum. They come out of economic struggle. They come out of political struggle. They come out of theoretical struggle. We shouldn't forget the role of theory. But no, they don't only come from solidarity movements around Palestine. What you need is a party. What you need is a communist party. And the fact that Alex Kalinikos, looks at the Palestine movement as if it's the answer really does show you the limits of SWP politics. And the SWP, of course, believe in spontaneity, that from the streets, from strikes, revolution will spontaneously come forward, that you don't need a mass communist party, you don't need a political program, and you don't need international coordination with other parties organized in an international. I'm not talking about an oil slick international, but what would happen in their model is that you do the job in Britain. This is the model of many Trotskyists. And you come to power in a country like Britain. And so wonderful is it, everyone goes, we must copy that. Well, what I've tried to do, just touch upon, and they're very different countries, and I'm not suggesting they're examples of working class rule, but you've seen what national isolation, when it's imposed on you, what happens. Russia, the leadership in Russia were well aware of the consequences of imperialist sanctions and the isolation of the revolution. They looked to Germany, they looked to Europe, they looked to China, they looked at the world revolution. And the idea that things are going to be so fantastic when you are suffering from a siege regime is just delusional. And that's the point that we need to get over to the left, that far from us being, a shining example to follow, yeah, we're in power, but we need to spread the revolution. We need to win the revolution, and we need to win the revolution very quickly, or we turn into our opposite. So, yeah, a British socialism that's left in isolation, if by some freak, the SWP managed to lead such a revolution, would not be a shining example. It would be something that people would look at and want to avoid. So we need to have a complete break with nationalism and spontaneity and the illusion that an isolated revolution will inspire the world to follow or to emulate that example. That is not going to happen, in my opinion. Finished there, Anne. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Jack. I wanted to make 2 points myself, actually. The first is in relation to the campaigns, the fact that Alex Kalinikos has said the answer to Venezuela comes from below. So there have been the Irish cousins of the SWP have been active, along with other groups, in setting up Venezuelan solidarity campaigns. And I'm thinking very soon, maybe next week, we'll have the Iranian, hopefully hands off the people of Iran type campaign. And very soon after this, we could have Cuba. So it feels like we're entering a kind of a phase of campaigns. And that's obviously a problem, because everybody's going to get burnt out. And clearly, we need to raise the need for political unity on a higher level. And I think in a way, maybe it's just because I'm so long on the tooth from campaigns. And I have to also admit that I am quite a keen campaigner. But you can see, how the burnout comes and how easy answers are for action, or forever also like wanting to reach out to wider layers, you know, the people on the streets, everybody, you know, to want to come rather than making it politically clear and politically principled. And that's not to say that I'm against the Palestine Solidarity Campaign or any other campaign. It's just that they reach a certain stage and you can see the tide going out, and you know, political answers becoming more necessary. The other point I wanted to say is that Hillel Tickton, I remember many years ago, and perhaps repeatedly since, has pointed to the direction of capitalism without a hegemonic state that can kind of absorb, you know, in the way the Marshall Plan did, the war in Europe, as leading to a world that would become ever more fragmented and ever more not dominated, but with ever more failed states. And so I was just kind of like raise that as a point, and also to respond to your what you said on international law. What you said last week on international law also was that, you know, it's a lie, it's always been a lie. I think I would take issue with that, because I think that it was has been a form of soft power, and it has allowed bourgeois states in Europe and outside of Europe to have the appearance of rationality and as holding close, you know, important principles of justice, etc., etc., etc. So when issues have arisen, when wars have arisen, they're referred to the ICJ or the other International Criminal Court or the ICJ, and you know, it allows for diplomacy. And provides some sort of a cement in terms of the relations between states. So I don't think it's just a lie. It's more complicated than just a lie. It's of course true that the interests of the United States and other leading powers will dominate, but I don't know. I think that it's an important tool in the armory, particularly of the less of the states that maybe, it depends on the government. Maybe it's been important for the United States at times. It's obviously not important for him now. He wants to break all the rules. With Israel, it continually broke all the rules, but you know, we've continued to go back to the ICJ, etc., etc. So I really just think that that's a phenomenon. It's worth examining, and I wouldn't say, yeah, as I already said, I wouldn't describe it just simply as a lie. I think it's had a function as a form of soft power. Anyway, so does anybody else want to have any make a contribution? Musha, I thought you perhaps had mentioned earlier that no, you're okay. Okay. So if there's one panelist, excuse me, sorry. I've just abused the chair and I can't find anybody else who's wanting to speak. It might just be that, Jack. And you've got your hand up, so.
Yeah, well, it's 2 minutes to 7. So I'm using it as I'll just reply to you, in other words. And look, ideas are real, if you see the point. So in that sense, Catholicism is real. Doesn't mean that God is real. So I take Catholicism very seriously. I take Protestantism very seriously, but I don't take God seriously. I take the idea of God, but I don't take God as real. So I think people have manufactured God for their own purposes. And so I just, when you were talking, I went, okay, soft power. Yes, I agree. It's an ideology. So just like a religion is an ideology. This isn't irrelevant. We don't just say, oh, it doesn't matter. It matters. So the fact that we've had this international law since Nuremberg, I don't recommend the film, by the way. Either way, then I just noted down, I went, Grenada, part of the British Commonwealth, invaded. Panama, invaded. Chile, government overthrown. Vietnam, Where was Congress? And you could just carry on. 40 interventions by America in the 20th century in Latin America, including tens of thousands of deaths, in Guatemala. This is because it's the global hegemon, and therefore it's attack dog in the Middle East. It's not, okay, you've got the international law. The United States vetoes it and says, well, we don't care. Israel said, we don't care. So what are you going to do about it? It shows you that it's a fiction. It's like me saying, oh, you killed someone. God will revenge me. Well, it might give me comfort to know that after you die, you're fry in hell. But hell doesn't exist. Heaven doesn't exist. God doesn't exist. The idea of hell exists. The idea of heaven exists. It's an ideology. When you then say it gives the chance for diplomacy, diplomacy is real. States will do deals. That's real. That's as real as war. Because diplomats get together and say, we're strong, you're weak, we want this off you. And you say, if you're weak, okay, we'll give you X. So diplomacy is real, and states resort to diplomacy. That's certainly true. So what we're seeing today in Venezuela is America wanting to reopen its embassy. That will allow them to negotiate with the government. So diplomacy is real. But if they turn around and say, you kidnapped our president, and this is against the law, the United States will just laugh at them and say, well, he's under trial now, and we don't care what you say. And that's the truth. And so if America's strong enough to impose its will, it's strong enough to impose its will. And my argument is that the left, it's not that protest politics are wrong. So if you look at the formation with all its limits of the CPGB, it clearly came in part from the Hands Off Russia movement. It also came from the BSP and the Socialist Labour Party, but the Hands Off Russia campaign was important. They formed councils of action all around the country. The Labour Party said that we will have a revolution, all power to the Soviet, or whatever. We don't believe it, but they said it. But the point I'm making is that the only answer, if you want to paraphrase Alex Kalinikos, is that the working class becomes a power with the ability to impose its own will. And they can do that in part before it's in state power, and it can do it with state power. But we've got to go beyond the politics of protest. We've got to go beyond the politics of strikes. We've got to go beyond the politics of propaganda. So that's really what I'm arguing. So the working class has to become a real power. I actually looked up this. I don't know whether my artificial intelligence was right. So if anyone can tell me, I did read it in Marx, this slogan that I quoted last week, that the working class needs to become the world's fourth power. My artificial intelligence tells me that was Robert Owen. Either way, it's a truth. And Marx, my artificial intelligence said that Marx must have repeated it. Okay, good old Robert Owen. So this is the point. You don't become a world power simply through protest politics. You cannot become a world power through protest politics. Protest politics you'd be stupid to dismiss it. That is true. And so, yeah, hands off Cuba, hands off Venezuela, hands off the peoples of Iran. Yes, yes, yes. But we need to go beyond that. So anyway, 3 minutes past. You're muted, by the way.
Excuse me. I was in such a haste to finish the meeting, I even muted myself. So thank you, comrades, for your participation. I've certainly found it a very useful discussion. Thank you, Yasmina. Thank you, Jack, and all other comrades. And next week, we'll be back with another discussion report from the PCC and another discussion on contemporary issues and how they relate to Marxism and the need for the working class to come to power. Okay, that's it. Okay, night night.